We're here in bright and breezy Salcombe this morning with the Wolf Rock Boat Company, because over the last 6 months they've introduced no fewer than 5 new brands to their fleet, and one of those brands is particularly interesting to us. It's called Iron Boats and they come from Sweden. Just outrageous! And so much pickup from that engine! Goodness me! Wow! Yeah, that's fun. Now, as you can see, one of the first and most interesting elements of these boats is the aesthetic. From a distance you might say, well, that's a rib, but actually it's not. This is a hard sports boat with a wraparound fender, and the idea for that comes from the founders of this company. Now, Lars and Henrik Peterson run one of the biggest rib companies in the world up in Sweden. They shift a lot of boats, but in 2016, getting a lot of feedback from their rib customers, they decided what they needed to do was generate a proper sports boat that didn't have an inflatable collar, that had a wraparound fender for easy, trouble-free, relaxed, knockabout boating that gave people confidence to come alongside, do their bits and bobs without having to dangle fenders here, there and everywhere. And this is the result. As I say, developed in 2016, introduced into the Scandinavian market in 2019-2020, and finally into the UK market in 2022 at the Southampton Boat Show. This is the flagship 827. This is the second largest boat, which will be our photo boat today, the 767, and there are 2 smaller boats in the range too. Now, the idea behind this collar is that it's made of a very resilient and, I'm told, quite expensive rubber. It has a lot of air pockets in there as well. Now, it doesn't, in the way that a rib collar might, provide additional buoyancy, so it's not about load carrying, it's solely about impact mitigation. So that's what it is, a wraparound fender. But it's quite a clever piece of work too at the same time. There's a higher density section right there at the bow to take any impacts if you experience a slightly dodgy coming along side manoeuvre, or even if you just want to spring off using your lines. It's nice and resilient there. Also, it's UV resistant, so it won't fade in the sun, even if you choose to use these boats in the Mediterranean. And it's non-marking as well, so if you choose to pull your boat up alongside something white and glossy and fiberglass, it won't leave a big black mark along the side when you raft up. Now, one of the key imperatives with the design of these new boats was to ensure that they came to market at a sensible kind of price point. And to that end, Lars and Henrik have been very careful to ensure that the Polish factory uses several modules that are common to each of the 4 boats in the range. So, the 827 and the 767, and in fact the smaller 2 boats, they all have a 2.44 metre beam. That means that all the deck furniture that 767 uses, or the 607, can also be used in the 827. They're all absolutely identical, the bench units, the consoles and so on. Clearly that makes it much more affordable to build these boats, because you don't have to mould a whole fresh set of components for each individual model. As we step on board in true Nordic style, we are met by a couple of good lockers for lines. You could equally use these as anchor lockers, one on either side, as you can see, plus an extended little swim platform with a little angle to the edge of it, just to give the outboard engine a decent arc of turn. If you want to really maximise your sense of security, it'd be nice for the fender section to go a little further aft and perhaps to wrap around this quarter, just to give you that confidence when you're coming alongside astern. But it's a very practical setup back here. A good size of engine well, plenty of space to trim your engine right out. And what we have here on this boat is Suzuki's 350 with the duo prop. Now, this is likely to be one of the most popular engines, though you could drop the ante a little, go down to 300 or even 250, or you could up it, as the Scandinavian market seems to do quite a lot. Right up to 450, you can spec this boat with a 450R for speeds in the region of 62 knots, but I'm told that even with this 350 on the transom, we should be good today for around about 49-50 knots with this boat. So that's plenty for a family platform. We'll also see that we have the petrol cap on the back edge of this aft bench seat, so if there are any spillages they don't go into the cockpit. In spite of that rib aesthetic, on the inside this is every bit a sports boat. As you can see, we've got elevated gunnels all the way forward to make it feel very cosseting and safe and secure. This is the standard layout you see here. So in the cockpit itself we've got an aft bench opposite an aft facing bench that backs onto those two helm seats. There's a big console with plenty of storage inside the front there, and there's another deep sociable section in that bow as well. Now, because it's modular, there are not a great many options for you to pick with this boat, or in fact with any of the other boats in the range. You can opt for the T-top, which as you can see we have here, and again that's quite a simple and rudimentary affair. There are no lights in there, no sunroofs, no speakers, no buttons, no remotes, nothing along those lines. It's simply a piece of fiberglass on some metal supports with a nav light on top. That is it. So it is solely for shade. It's a traditional T-top, that's exactly what it's for, that's what it does. You can also spec a spray hood for this boat, and you can pick a table to go in here as well. We don't actually have the deck fittings for that table, but if we pop across to the 767, a slightly smaller boat, you can see that the table is actually in position here. So that fits very nicely. And you can also spec that as a table that will drop into that space and turn that into an aft sun pad. Now if we move forward, you'll see that relative to the other boats, this bow deck is quite big. There's a lot of that extra space, that extra length is used up here on the 827. So the infill that would go from the leading edge of that console right forward to that bow space, that forepeak, that is too great simply to dangle an infill. So what Iron Boats has done is design an alternative for the 827, which is not yet on this boat, but it involves the mouldings leading from that forepeak back down to this pattern pretty much in the deck there, so that we have additional lateral sections, creating a C-shaped sort of wraparound area with a table in the centre that then can drop into that space and create a forward sunbed as well as the aft sunbed. Aside from that though, the table, the T-top, the spray hood and a couple of infills, the only real options we have here are the engine from 250 to 450, the electronics and the decking, plus a fridge beneath that aft facing bench. Another of the really key elements for Iron Boats is of course the hull. Now in terms of the design and the development, and more importantly in terms of the user experience, Lars and Henrik know exactly what it was they were after, and that's why they went to the Mannerfelt design studio. Now over the years Mannerfelt has been responsible for victories in 26 powerboat world championships, so it knows exactly what it's doing. And on these hulls they factored in a slightly broader midsection and then a slightly concave aft planing section. And the idea there is to dial in the stability that Lars and Henrik insisted was necessary. In fact, they reckon they made it so stable that you can even do without trim tabs. Now we've got good 15 knot winds running today, northerlies with 20-22 knot gusts, so we should be in a really good position to work out just how effective they've been with that. Out on the water it feels really quite nicely contained. You have these wraparound seats, they form part of this hard-top structure, so you've got nice little lateral wings there to stop you shifting sideways. You also got the seats that fold up so you can brace yourself against those. They're a little bit thin in terms of the cushioning on the top there, so they're not dedicated bolsters particularly, but with that big foot brace down below, it's a comfortable spot just to jam yourself against that and get underway at fairly moderate pace. I mean, if you go really towards the top end, 40 knots plus, you've got to anticipate most people will just drop that seat, settle in behind that screen and relax in the lee of that screen with a bit more shelter and protection. But anyway, we'll start with the standing position and we'll get a up and underway. Trimmer right in, and right from the off, it's clear that this has loads and loads of hole shot. I mean, we're already doing 35 knots. In fact, if we come back down and try that again, because I wasn't quite anticipating it being as rapid as that in terms of its pickup. We'll trim her back in and get back down to 0. Of course, with this 350, you can go to 450 for around about 62 knots, but that's not really what this boat is all about. Yeah, it's got a performance hull, and evidently its hole shot is fantastic. But with the 350, you've got that duo prop, so you've got loads of grip at that bottom end. So let's have another go at that. Yeah, the lift onto the plane is pretty flat, and we're there in about 3 seconds flat, passing 30 knots in 7 seconds, 40 knots in about 10 seconds. Give her a good bit of extra trim now. Oh, and you feel the waterline disappear way up. It feels tremendously efficient, very quick. Loads of hull is out of the water now, but it's also quite stable. So, running parallel to the land with 15-20 knot maybe gusts hitting us on the port beam. We're not feeling into that at all. And that's even though we don't have any trim tabs fitted to this boat. That's those concave aft hull sections in action, keeping us nice and stable, and that's exactly what Mannerfelt and the Swedish design guys wanted to achieve with this. And we turn into their seas now, a little bit more trimmer in a touch just to dip that nose. And then the pickup again is just outrageous. Passing 40 knots, a little bit more trim, just scooting over these seas with just a tiny bit of planing surface at the back end there. Everything feels right out. The waterline's way back, 47 knots. They're so slippery, they're so stable and so quick, and that pickup is just lovely. And as you'll see, when we throw into a bit of a turn, there's plenty of grip too. We'll trim her in a little bit. Ease her around. Oh. Loads and loads of grip, both from the hull and from the props. That's a full 360 at 41, 42 knots we've just done. And actually, I'm accelerating through the turn. There's that much grip, 43 knots. And it's interesting because if I trim out a little, 45 knots now, loads of that hull out of the water again, as I say, and I fire into a similar turn. If you find a little bit slippy like that, you could just dip that nose for a little extra grip, or you could elevate that bow as you come out and really pick up the revs. It's a fantastic driver's boat, it really is. Wow. Yeah, that's fun. It's a thing you can put 100 horsepower extra on this. It's outrageous. In a good way. Now, it's time for me to do as I suggested myself, sit myself down, take it a little easier. And from this position, I'm very nicely protected, but we don't have an adjustable seat and we don't have an adjustable steering wheel, and the Suzuki display is obscured directly by the top rim of the wheel, so I have to duck down to see my revs and my knots, my fuel, my trim level. I'm right enough, you can get most of that over in the central section from the Garmin chart plotter. But I'd like to see an adjustable wheel, or else that Suzuki data display relocated. But right now, not only is this proving itself to be a tremendous performance boat for a keen driver, but we're doing we're doing 30 knots with 40 litres per hour disappearing from our fuel tank, and that's a pretty efficient cruise. We've got a 300 litre fuel tank here, so you can easily cruise 200 nautical miles, not a problem at all. And that's not something you'd necessarily expect from a fun, sporting, open day boat like this. Now, I've probably covered most of what I need to cover, in all honesty. But it's such a good fun boat to drive. And so much pickup from that engine, from those duoprops. Goodness me. So basically, it's quite difficult to think of a way in which this boat does not perform. And it's so quick, the whole shot's tremendous. It's also extremely stable. It's great fun to play with. The pace retention is amazing. It's got quite a lofty top end. I mean, you're doing, well, 40 knots within about 10 seconds, 46 within about 14, 15. You have to eke out the last 4 knots or so, but by then you've had 99% of your fun, which leads me to suspect that actually a lot of people who buy this boat might choose to spec it with the lower rated 300, because you still get the duoprop, you still get all that pickup and all that fun en route to the mid-40s. And yeah, while it might stop round about 45, 47 instead of 49 or 50, you save 4,000 or 5,000 quid, and it doesn't diminish your fun in any substantial way whatsoever. Suffice it to say, I'm pretty impressed by this iBoats 827. For a start, it's an absolutely fantastic driver's boat. You get her out on the water, and even though we didn't have much in the way of swells this morning to really test her out, you just know from driving it, from helming it, that you could easily elevate that nose, make the boat do what you want it to do, to surf down the swells, really get amongst it and enjoy yourself. It's such an engaging and such an engaged boat to drive. And then of course there's the modular construction process that they're using at their Polish factory. I mean, I've intimated that that makes it relatively affordable, and although the prices have gone up around about 15% since the Southampton Boat Show and its launch, it's still impressively affordable. This flagship 827 can be yours for £90,000 including VAT as a base model, including the 250 horsepower Suzuki outboard. And in this spec, the spec of the test boat with the 350 horsepower outboard and the T-top and the electronics and the fridge and so on, it can be yours for £110,000. And by the standards of the modern market, that is a really impressive feat.